But we're delighted to have you here today for this series. We welcome Dr. Linda Carnes-McNaughton here to tell us about North Carolina ceramics and pottery. Again, a point of personal privilege. One of the books over here is about Seagrove pottery. That's a misspelling. My mother-in-law, my wife's mother, her uncle was a member of the Seagroves family here in Chatham County. He was the oldest one, and he went to work for the railroad. He was a surveyor. And what the way the railroads worked was that they would start here, they would build a railroad so far, stop and make a camp, and build on from there. Well, each one of the camps that they stopped at, they named for a member of the crew. They got to this little place, and they stopped, and they said, okay, this will be Seagroves. You ever seen the sign that says plan ahead? When the sign painter painted it, he didn't have room for the last S. So it's Seagrove, North Carolina. Well, we welcome you here to hear about ceramics in North Carolina. I was just talking with her about, I don't know if any of you watched the program, some of us get addicted to The Curse of Oak Island. And they've been digging up, well, people have been digging there for 150 years, I guess, looking for the treasure. What they have found so far is lots of ceramics, either glass beads or pieces of pottery, and they can tell what the age or when people lived there by the pottery, by the dating. So with that, welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much. Today, I've lived in Chatham County since 1984, so I call it home. And I'll just go through this and say that North Carolina is absolutely the best place to study pottery or ceramics, simply because it's the state that has a well-developed redware, earthenware tradition. It's the state that has a well-developed salt glazed stoneware tradition. It's a state that has a well-developed alkaline glaze tradition, and it's where groundhog kilns were being used. So all of these things come together to make this a very, very rich ceramic heritage state. And I'm going to touch on a few of those things today. So buckle up. It'll be a little bit of a speed drive because I'm going all across the state and back through time. When we have a chance to break and look at other materials, I've brought featured some kiln sites. These are blow-up photographs of some pottery kiln sites that I'm going to show you. Several of those that I helped to excavate. Others were excavated in the 70s and early 80s, but we'll touch on those. I've also brought some examples of ceramics, just because I want to give you some background about the difference between earthenware, stoneware, and the compatible glazes that are used. So I really approach this sort of like a technician in a way, and archaeologist, but learning ceramics and how they're made is critically important to how I chose this study, because we're not just interested in the product, we're interested in people who made it, where they came from, what traditions are being reflected in their ceramics, as well as how they fired these pots. So those kiln sites, those points of the process are critically important to me. There are auction houses, there are museums, which feature some fabulous North Carolina ceramics. And I'm kind of getting down there, getting in the dirt to find out where these types of ceramics were produced and who produced. So that's important. So what I've got here today, this is my earthenware sample. And some of these are reproductions, but that's okay. They're still fine ceramics. But some of these represent the St. Asaph's slip trail decorated earthenware that was, we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. These were French Huguenots who immigrated into Pennsylvania, came down the wagon road into Chatham and Alamance County. Then I've got a replica of another slip trail decorated piece. This is earthenware And this is a potter whose kiln site I'm currently working on, Jacob Weaver, of which there were 3 generations of potters, and he was also German. That's Catawba Valley. And then because I only had so much room to bring things, here's some teeny tiny miniatures, really nicely done, of what would be Moravian decorations. And we're going to talk about the difference between Moravian floral motifs versus everybody else who's doing other geometric motifs. Then the later ceramic that we have, again, known very well throughout North Carolina, still being produced today, just down the road there in Streetwoods. We have this unique, this is called a pot hat. You can see it's a cream concert. Terry Zook used to call it a pot hat. This is alkaline glazing. So this is alkaline glazing on stone, and this would be a cream riser. Remember, all of these pieces were utilitarian long before they became art pieces. So this is produced primarily in the Catawba Valley region, this kind of glaze. The kind of glaze that's typically used in central North Carolina, most of you are familiar with, is salt glazing. This piece is actually a Webster piece. It's a small jar, 1 gallon jar. It has some brick drips on it. And so the texture of the salt glaze is it looks like an orange. Right? So my husband Kurt is going to help me today. We're going to talk about, here are some glaze definitions. So if you want to hand them sound. Again, these are.
If some can share, I think we have 20 copies here.
Okay. So these are definitions of the glazes that I'm actually talking about. These are all glazes found on traditional pottery, not modern pottery. When you get to art pottery and you get to modern pottery, all bets are off because everybody's doing all kinds of other things, and they're firing, most likely, they're firing in either oil or gas kilns. So here's the second handout. Again, this is, here you go. Okay, Cindy, thank you. So whenever I'm teaching ceramics to Girl Scout groups, colleagues, other undergraduate students, I begin a basic identification by understanding the physical properties of the clay. Now, there won't be a pop quiz on this or anything, but it's just to sort of understand that basically there are 3 types of ceramic bodies. There's earthenware, the lowest fired. There's stoneware, the medium type of body. And then the highest fired is porcelains. And looking at the physical properties, they're all related to how, what the ingredients are in the clay and how they fire, if they're permeable or not, if they require glaze or not. So that second handout, actually, here's the top and bottom of it. These are the physical, these are the bodies and the qualities of these ceramic bodies, earthenware, stoneware, porcelain. And then these are the compatible glazes. And I have to have a glaze that's compatible to the body because when it's being fired in the kiln, the glaze must mature or vitrify when the body vitrifies. That got it? Don't lose anybody on that. I think just looking at physical properties. So that way people can understand why you don't find lead glazes on stoneware bodies. Because if you try to put a lead glaze on a stoneware body, when the body's maturing at a certain 2300 degree or whatever, that lead glaze will crawl right off of there. Now, all of these traditional potters, they knew this. This wasn't textbook learning. This was trial and error experiment learning. And so we're going to sort of go through this and sort of show some clear examples of that. Then the final handout, one more. Ms. Wiggins and Cindy asked me to expand a little bit on the Chatham County potters, because this county and Alamance County, this was a little hotbed of potteries going back to late 1700s. And so I've got a general list here, Cindy, of just some of those and the sources that we know about these, some from deed records. people who were my mentors, who were folklorists and historians, who helped us sort of put all of this together. So, okay, I guess I'm ready now. All right, any questions so far? I haven't lost you yet, have I? My dear neighbor said, well, Linda, maybe you could put some animation in your slides. And I said, well, that's past my technical skill level, but I can be animated. I can certainly provide the animation as we go through, because this is a passionate subject of mine. And I just retired as a federal archaeologist last year, but pottery research absolutely never stops for me. All right, here we go. So we always say that these are the basic ingredients globally, no matter where you are, the basic ingredients of understanding and making pottery. We have earth that provides our suitable clays, and they're not all the same. So different clays obviously fire at different temperatures. You can reference your physical property chart. The water for mixing the clay into a malleable kind of ingredient that you can then manipulate. The fuel for firing, and mostly here in North Carolina in colonial period, it would have been wood. In other places, say Stoke-on-Trent or in the Northeast, it could have been coal. So that is fuel for fire. And then of course humans to then manipulate this and experiment with how to mix all of this together and make pottery. Our local, I put Mark's quote in here because I liked it a lot. He says, pots are portraits of the landscape as they reflect the clay, the forest, and the minerals that are used and crushed up into the ingredients. We find that to be true. So this is a quick overview. I plan to just touch on Native American pottery, but this was a poster I put together in 2000 for the State Archaeological Society. And one type of pottery that's on here that I won't be touching on, I don't think this has a laser pointer, does it? Yeah, okay. So these three right here, these three pots are what we call colonna ware. And this type of pottery was coarse earthenware molded by hand and burnished. It's something of a melange because we know in areas that enslaved African Americans were making this pottery. And we also know that American Indians were making this pottery and they were teaching each other. And what they're doing is making coarse earthenwares unglazed by coiling it, but they're making them in European vessels. So it was purposely for trade. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. I don't have great examples of that, but otherwise, here is prehistoric sherds or pre-contact period sherds through colonial ware, and then beginning with our historic sherds. This is the crux of this talk. And then once you sort of get past the 1920s and 30s, where you have art pottery exploding everywhere, I sort of back away from that because those kinds of kilns and those kind of glazes are very, very unique to that tradition of pottery. All right, so we're going to do just an overview quickly of pottery research in the state. I've brought to share with you some of these great studies. Some of these are individual studies of maybe about one site, a couple of sites. Some are more detailed exhibit catalogs. I actually refer to this book, Turners and Burners, as the BIU. Dr. Zug was my mentor. And when I came to North Carolina, having studied pottery in Georgia and Tennessee, he sat on my committee and guided me to two sites that I did my dissertation. A very wonderful ambassador for our state and helped to found the North Carolina Pottery Center, which is in Seagraves. The other two books, these two companion volumes, Ceramics in America, are 2010, 2009. These are national publication books, and they basically tell the story of Arabian pottery and all the other backcountry slipware potters. Then we have some that, like in the state, and some of these others that are on individual potteries. So there's a lot out there that can be sourced and can help pull together whatever particular tradition across the state they might be studying. And of course, as an archaeologist, what I wanted to do was go to the ground and ground truth some of these traditions. And that resulted in the discovery of several other slip decorator potters who were out there that were not part of the Moravian tradition. It sort of rewrote that part of history about the earthenwares in our state. And of course, we have benefited from enormous exhibits at the Pottery Center, the Mint Museum, Ackland. All of these people are tuned in to the ceramics history here. So we have the benefit of exhibition catalogs that have helped us, enhance this picture, enhance this understanding of our ceramic history. And again, from private collections, how many of you here collect pottery? Oh, that is excellent. All right. So, and you may have your own particular genre of pot or pottery that you'd like to collect. It's out there. It's wonderful. I appreciate people who appreciate pottery because that's the way it's going to last. All right. So early history. Can everybody see okay, or do we need to lower the lights? Are we okay on that? All right. So I will give, of course, acknowledgement to our first potters in the state of North Carolina, and those would be Native American women. It was always women producing pottery in pre-contact period cultures. And this is a painting by Martin Payne showing a grandmother, her daughter, and granddaughter. And it's being passed down through generations how these pots are made. I like this painting too because it also shows the Carolina belt right there. So this is what would be the woodland period. So pottery in this area comes in about 1000 BC, and it's regionally specific. We call it the woodland period, and that defines the woodland period. Bows and arrows and the making of pottery define the woodland period in pre-contact period culture. But it, of course, did not stop there. American Indian potters continue to make some incredible pots, and some of these books refer to that. The Catawba, the Cherokee, and even our state recognized tribes continue to make beautiful art work. They don't necessarily cook with their pots anymore. Very few of them make comedy, but they might. But these are now more into the art realm of pottery production. And there's a great dialogue between archaeologists and these American Indian potters, contemporary American Indian potters, about how we look at the past or the fragments of the past and how they can be replicated. So moving on now, we talk about the frontier period. So many of you who may be history people out here, sort of there's this, I always say, seemingly westward wave of production of how our state was populated. And I show this first because if you look 1670s, 1715, 40s, 50s, it sort of appears that they're all coming in and marching westward. Well, that's not accurate. It's not always the case. So we choose a different map to understand these pockets of ethnic groups coming into here, how they were coming in, yes, from the coast, yes, from the south and moving upward, and primarily through the great Philadelphia wagon road. And several of our potters came into the state by that wagon road. And these would be potters who first disembarked in Pennsylvania, maybe learned some of that redware tradition, then traveled on down through Virginia into central North Carolina. So it's always good to look at this because it also helps us to understand the influences that are being expressed in their pottery, whether they're German or whether they were Scotch-Irish or French Huguenots, some of them. So this is a more accurate map of the settlement of the state. And then later through time, of course, wagon roads, transportation corridors improved, and that helped potters in the 19th century get their pots out to a wider market rather than just their immediate hamlets. Okay, as I said, Dr. Zug was a folklorist, And he was also a historian. He retired Navy man, actually. He's a folklore professor at UNC. And in his very early books, these here ones, they're well worn, they're coming apart. These are 1980. And Dr. Zug was outlining what he was seeing as a folklorist when he began to research pottery families that were still here, what we call clay clans. And he began to look at multiple generations in different family names, and Cravens or Fox or Loy's, this one in particular. And he distinguished what he considered to be 7 primary historic regions of pottery making. Again, thinking about our distribution chart and how people got here. So yes, you can see there's the Buncombe County, which we did a survey on that and found a lot of information there. There is the very rich Catawba Valley region. There's the Eastern Piedmont, where Seagrove, Jugtown, all of those pottery areas are located. Then there's our wonderful Alamance, Chatham County. The Moravians were here pretty early, 1750s in Forsyth County. And then we have Union County and Wilkes County as sort of smaller, but still represented pottery traditions. Each one with kind of unique pottery production. All right, so now I'm really going to get technical on you, so don't fall asleep and don't walk out over here, because these are the types of kilns. So not only did these potters migrate here 1 or 2 generations to get here with their knowledge of old world pottery and techniques and designs, but they also came with their own template of how to fire those pots. And so the kiln sites are what I always call that ground zero. That is the truth. When you go to the kiln sites, you are looking at the point of production, and most of the time unmitigated, unpolluted, so that you know what's being made there is what you're going to find. So we talk about how did all these kiln styles develop. Again, North Carolina is a very rich state for sterling ceramics, because we have, through archaeological research, we have square kilns, we have round kilns, we have rectangular kilns in updraft, downdraft, and crossdraft. And crossdraft is simply taking a chimney and laying it down on a slope. And that's what most of the ground hog kilns were. They were, firebox at one end, exhaust on the other, let gravity help you. So these are European prototypes of various kilns. And they function differently. Modern potters today, put the lid on it, flip the switch, and it's either electric or oil or something like that. This is a whole different strategy of success and failure of looking at how pots are made. So we have round kilns, what's called a Hubble kiln, with perimeter fireboxes. Pointer is is there. And then we have a downdraft. So this is updraft. It simply refers to how the heat is introduced into the chamber and how the heat then moves out of the chamber. Updraft is the simplest. Well, crossdraft is simple too. Downdraft is a little more complicated. The heat comes in, you can see this. The heat comes in through perimeter fireboxes, and then it goes sucked up into the chamber and then back down through what's called a transept flue. And it comes out a standing chimney to the side. So we see variations of these kilns in North Carolina. Now, these are the 2 rectangular examples, and these are prototypes for southern ground hog kilns. And some of you may have noticed, if you've been to venture Burling Craig's kiln in the western part of the state, how it looks versus the ground hog kilns they used at Jugtown by the Owens. They're very different, but you can be a lump or a splitter. To me, they're different. But one is low vault, still with the firebox at one end, the exhaust at the other end. But some have the ability to have higher chambers, so you can stack pots in there. Otherwise, the ground hog kiln is a single shot thing, like this. This is Burling Craig's kiln. So this is very basic. Here it is being blasted off. This is the chimney in here. And the loading port is at the chimney end. It's the difference again from the eastern groundhog. But here you load underneath that shed, that's the firebox in. Heat passes in straight across the layer of pots and exits. And you go climb in and out through this back door. Children were often around who helped unload the kiln and help stack it. So these are types of the physical features that I'm looking for in the ground. What's left of these kiln footprints when I get out there on a site? And another one that's pretty spectacular. Now, we haven't found any like this in North Carolina, but in South Carolina, where they had a large enslaved population who helped with the pottery making, you find these ginormous, this is Pottersville, you find these 100-foot long groundhog kilns. Principle is the same. Firebox at one end, exhaust at the other on a slope. And they had lots of people making pottery. They had lots of people helping to load and unload and fire it. Now, what's the prototype for this? China. These are, it's called a dragon kiln. These are dragon kilns from China. So this is unique in South Carolina that they have these enormous kinds of groundhog kilns, but it makes sense because they were making pots to store food for a very large enslaved population. And if many of you've heard of Dave the Slave, he and his cohorts were trained to make pottery, and they were the ones operating these kilns. Okay, so we're going to start with some of the earliest archaeological work that was done here. Another mentor, Stanley South, who's passed, he was an archaeologist, worked in the state for 20 years, and he did some of the earliest work on the Moravian tradition. Now, how many of you have visited Old Salem? Yeah, okay, you've got a real good idea then of fancy slip decorated stuff. Most of their iconography that's used on that tradition is religious in symbolism. It's usually flowers or pomegranates or something like that. It's different, it sets it apart from some of our other redware potters here. But we had Stan South working on Godfred Aust was their the progenitor. He came in 1755. Now, keep in mind again that in the Moravian tradition, pottery making there was very much an old world enterprise. It was passing down this information from an apprentice. You were apprenticed to a master. Then you became a journeyman. Then you became a master potter. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes they got irritated and left. But it's a very different system of learning the clay techniques than it is through your father and your uncle and your clay family. It's a different kind of approach to learning the trade. So Stan South did some early work here. Another archaeologist in 78 came and did this work on the Kraus-Blucher kiln. One of those renegades that got booted out of the Moravian community was Jacob Philip Myers, who went over to Salisbury and built this wee little kiln, a circular updraft kiln, where he continued to make Moravian looking pottery, because that's what he was trained on. It only lasted 2 years, but he was the only one sort of outside that enclave. And then more recently, 2 other kiln sites, the Schaffner Kraus kiln and the one on lot 38, which is Renault Christ. Both of those have been now researched by other archaeologists. So again, we have some more rectangular examples here. And here's an example of Moravian pottery. Quite beautiful, quite striking. And again, if you want to really get down on it here, Ceramics in America, 2001, and this is a more recent book by Steve Compton, which is a nice overview of that tradition. So there's lots of literature out there, but again, they were making press molded materials, and you can see this floral designs and motifs, but it's still utilitarian in essence. All right, so then Linda comes along, and Linda's working with Dr. Sewell, and we're looking for a dissertation topic. And he recommends that I pick a couple of sites that I really want to get down on, literally, figuratively. So I worked with him to pick 2 sites for dissertation sites. One in the Catawba Valley, which is a famous, well-known potter, Daniel Siegel. And I say he's famous because he produces these kind of stellar pots, master potter, again, alkaline glaze. He's of German origin. He produces more than pots. He has a son who works with him at his shop. He has a son-in-law who works with him at his shop, and a couple of other apprentices. So it's an opportunity to look at what he was doing. But the key part is that he was trained in earthenware production. Very few of those pieces survive, maybe 4. And so I wanted to see the technological shift from making earthenware pots to making stoneware. How did he do that? How did he adjust what he was making? Where did he get his clays from? Did the vessels forms change? So those were all questions that I really wanted to focus on. And the second site was the Solomon Loy site. And we're going to talk a lot about him because that's pretty cool stuff. But he, again, learned from his father, then and uncles, made earthenware, beautiful earthenware, and then he made salt glaze stone. All right. So one of the ways that we go about finding these sites, I think that was the question earlier. How do we go to find these sites? When we get out on the landscape, we sometimes go door to door. We knock on people's doors. We go to people who we know have collections, and we'll say, may we see your collection? And in some cases, they open the door and they put all their pots on the steps for me to see. It was my introduction to this, but we had an opportunity to have some funding. I wish I had the Curse of Oak Island funding. I could dig a lot of kiln sites with that funding. But we had a small certified local government grant to do a survey because we were looking at pre-contact period sites and historic period pottery sites. So I'm out there in the field knocking on doors, asking people, do you know about the pottery that was made here? Are you a descendant of any of these potters? Do you have some pottery you could share with me? And it was quite remarkable what was out there. So that was in 85, 86. Now here's some overview maps. This is Alamance County, of course, but you can see there are a couple of different concentrations of where I found some remarkable sites. And some of these are descendants or relatives of the Loy, L-O-Y family, and some are others like the Vincents and the Boggs family. And then some other features. So this is a map familiar to most of you. This is the Alamance County spoon map. And you see this red zone down here at the bottom. Well, that was actually part of Chatham County until 1897, when it was annexed into Alamance County. Now, why is that relevant or important? Because in the period when the potters are working here, it's Chatham County, and they even sign their pots, Chatham County. They're very proud of it, but now the sites are physically located in Alamance County. So we have a couple of different concentrations there. And the spoon map is great because we know it's created from Orange County, 1849. So as you go further back, you're going to go to Orange County records to look for those names and those deed records and purchase records of the sites. Okay, here's a little bit of some close-up, again, Spooner's map. The Stoner Church, I'm going to talk about here just a minute. But we get maps like this, and they're just loaded with information about settlement history. These show houses, it shows churches, and Stoner Cemetery is one of those. But look at the names. So Sharp, Platt, Isley, Dixon, Patterson. All right, this is a little glimpse of Stoner Church, which I love churchyards. They're wonderful records of reflect again the local landscape and who lived there. And this one is a very early church. What we've learned from the records of this church is that the Loys, the Albrights, the Faust all came kind of as a colony. They came as a colony down the wagon road at one time. And then they intermarried, which is very common in the clay clan system. You marry, someone owns a tract of wood, you need that for fuel, and you bury that owner's daughter, or something like that. It helps you sort of secure the resources, secure the secrets of your clays mixes, and establish a labor force as well. All right, so here's one that's interesting. So Jacob Albright, he is the father of Jacob Albright Jr., who we know is a documented potter. And Jacob Albright Jr. was Henry Loy's father-in-law. But more interestingly to me is this glyph incised on the back of this one headstone, which we see repeated on the Loy slip decorated regiers. All right, so this is part of the results of that first survey. And we're out here, we're finding kiln sites. Now, some had been burned up, impacted by agricultural landscaping or something. So they had very little integrity to further explore, but others did. But you can see we're right at the Chatham Alamance line where we are finding these sites. We found 3 sites that had an unusual kind of side loading groundhog kiln. So that's kind of a hybrid, but it worked. And this is Albert Loy's kiln. We didn't have to excavate too much. It still had some ruins that were visible, mapped and moved on. Then we found the Vincent site. And again, we've got representative redwares that came down through the family. These are the Bobs. You see redware, earthenware dishes, plus salt clay stoneware. And redware dishes were made until the 1930s, until the Food and Drug Administration kind of shut them down. Basically, the potter's philosophy was it's still safe. A lead glazed redware dish is safe if you're just baking it, you know, which maybe they were doing. But if you put any kind of acidic ingredient, tomato or blueberries or something like that, it's going to bring the lead into solution. So they were still sort of cranking out some lead glaze there. Then these 2 sites, and this is a very early Loy site, Solomon Loy, right here in the middle of the field. But these are the materials we got from testing in this field. And you can see right here, the second Loy site, how very similar these pieces are. So this is the one I came back to and focused on to get a full excavation. All right, here's the house site at the Solomon Loy site. Again, this was a great surprise to me. We had these historic buildings here. We had a log barn. We had a log cabin. And if you look closely at the chimney, it had glazed bricks in it, where one of, glazed bricks from the kiln being dismantled and then added to this chimney. So I excavated not 1, but 2 kilns were found at this site. Again, 1 for earthenware, 1 for stoneware. These were 17 feet in diameter. So standing on the landscape, they would have been very prominent features for people to see. They knew what they were firing. They probably gathered there socially for food and drink, and if they drank, and music maybe. And so this was a 7-week project where we excavated with some volunteers, mostly myself though, these 2 kilns. So this one on the top is kiln A, is the downdraft kiln. The transept flue is under it. The smokehouse sits on about 9 o'clock to noon, but I got most of it. And then the chimney had been disassembled and built there. This are an updraft kiln with 4 perimeter fire boxes. So typically updraft, you fire lead glaze through. And here's what he's doing. So these are some of the remarkable, unique kind of decorative techniques that are passed down through several generations. I think a lady asked me about motif. This center star here is basically a cruciform that was being used. These are called lunettes. This is his attempt at like Jackson Pollock kind of design here, very ahead of his time, but unique to Solomon Loy. And the thing is, he didn't stop there. Well, here's a signed one. This plate is, you can sign nested triangles, Solomon Loy. And this plate was on display at the Pottery Center in Seagrove for a long time. But unique patterns. Okay, here is a close-up of his updraft kiln and big stone foundation with the superstructure above ground would have probably been stone and brick. Why? Because brick allows the thermal, expansion and contraction when you're firing up these puppies, and they're pretty hot. And so the stone is a good foundation, but the superstructure was probably brick. And here's a close-up of the downdraft kiln. And remember what I said, this site physically is in Alamance County now, but when he was operating, it was Chatham County. So here are some of his amazing stonewares. And if you can read this pot, it says Solomon Lloyd. He wasn't a great speller though, because it says refined instead of refined. Refined stoneware, state of North Carolina, Chatham County, family jar, 1856. So he was proud. This was probably a shop piece that he sort of boasted, I can make this stuff. Look at what I can do. All right, and he made other pieces. So here is a piece of Solomon Lloyd, and here's a grave marker that was once at Cane Creek Cemetery from a child's grave of 1834. He also made in his shop, these are pipe heads, that's spackle pipe head, and these are small little spiles. They look like fingers, but you put your pipe head on here to then fire them. All right, here's the Lloyd genealogy chart that we put together. And you can see multiple generations of this family through time. And if you study it more closely, you can see who they married. So here's Eliza Stoner, and the Stoners came up from Catawba Valley. Here is the Boggs, so they're just down the road. Here's William Phillips in Person County. Phillips, Wolf, and some others were in Person County. But here's Albert Lloyd, we saw his kiln. And so these, Solomon, who is here, had a brother and another brother and another brother who all made pottery. And they likely learned it from their papa, Henry. All right, so moving on, in Alamance County, we had a gentleman come to us who was surface collecting for projectile points or something. And he started finding a lot of pottery, so he brought it to us. And we were then able to identify in this field, these are slip decorated redwares, and this is Henry's father. Solomon's father, Henry, and he would have worked with his father-in-law, Jacob Albright Jr. We have the deed records that in his inventory that confirm that this was the pottery site. And this is one of those spiles, like you put a pipe head on when you fire it. We found this small type of a little face that was probably from one of these spiles, but I picked it up and I turned around and somebody's looking at me, it was looking back at me, wow. So just, a whimsy, maybe made by one of the children. All right, so then we move on to Solomon's sister, and that would have been Holly. And this shop, now you can see this is the post office. Who was asking me about post offices? Yes, these ladies. So this is one post office, the H. Lloyd post office, and this is William Henry Lloyd. And it's his ancestor site that his ancestor site, John P., that we found. But notice also the photographs that came from the family. Here's another chimney that's got recycled kiln brick in it. So these are still tangible places on the landscape. Now, these are artifacts collected from the John Lloyd site. You can see they're all varieties of colors and slip decorated vessel forms. And he also made press molded pipe plates. That was a very common thing for most of these backcountry potters, making pipes, usually the women and the children engaged in making a little money side. But his motifs are very much in keeping with what we call the St. Asaph's tradition of literature. Okay, another brother of Solomon was Joseph Lloyd. So that sent us to Person County, where here we had one day, just one day, we did a magnetometer survey that gave us a place to start, and we came down onto a hot spot, which was the collapsed kiln foundation. And this was right next to a hog lagoon, so I don't know if you could have gone back to much longer. It's pretty strong. So Joseph Lloyd gets acknowledged that he had two sons, on the chart who were also potters. All right, and then this is some of the artifacts from the Joseph Loy site. We have a candlestick, we have kiln furniture. If you find kiln furniture, you know that you are at a site that it's not a domestic site with pottery broken. It's a production site with the pottery is also there. All right, so my second survey that I was able to do again with certified local government grant with Buncombe County, because we knew that there's a lot of potters still practicing in Buncombe County, but we wanted to go back to document the sites that were there in more or less the early to late 19th century. So we had two areas. We did the countywide survey. We had 32 potters that we documented. We physically found 10 pottery sites, and testing those, we found kiln remains at 4. And that was a surprise to most. They just thought it was totally all gone. So again, another jug town, and you'll see this on early maps. We know of the jug town today, but there were many other jug towns across the state. It was a common name. It would be, where like an atelier where groups of potters come together and work at each other's shops oftentimes. So here's Ed Stone and J.H. Henry Stone. These potters migrate up out of South Carolina, Edgehill area. And there's lots of information about the Penland, Marion Penland, and the shop. Another one that we found was the Oscar Lewis Batchelder site. Now, he was officially an art potter, but we found part of his kiln here, and many of his wares, there's a picture of him. He called it the Omar Khayyam potter. So he was very much into this, art movement in the early 20s. So here's his shop and the operation. Another one that we were able to test and got some kiln remains. These broken pieces on the right came out of the kiln area. Where those are our shovel tests, and there's a log house there. And then the one on the left, Mark J.H. Stone, was a whole one that was in an antique shop that we saw. So we know that they were making these kinds of storage jars at this place. And many people, like I said, they worked around in the community with other people's shops. James Rutherford's site, he wasn't technically a potter, but he hired 4 or 5 of the local potters to work on his site. And it was this big open field. You can see the grass there. And we came right down. It wasn't really luck. We did do some testing, but we came right down on the remains of a rectangular round hog kiln on this side. And, studied it, mapped it, covered it, back up. But that was, again, a surprise. And there's the data. Now, moving down into the Weaverville area, or excuse me, up into the Weaverville area, we had the Donkel brothers, George and David. And George and David migrated from the Catawba Valley into the mountains to study pottery, make pottery. And these photographs, this is a series of photographs, staged production done by William Barnhill in 1917. So it shows, it's funny because you have to realize that he's got the same clothes on each time, and he's not really doing that part because this would take days, but he's just staging it so that William could take his photographs and document the process. So he's over here acting like he's loading the firebox. This is the pug mill. This is a color enhanced postcard. That's his pug mill for pugging to clay. Here's the pug mill with a mule attached to it right here. And here's good old George, and he's only 31 in this picture. He looks slightly ancient, but you get it, he's acting like he's making that. And then up there, you get him processing the clay. So these resources are fabulous when you can find them. That's a rare thing. Here's some of his full pots, and here's us working on this site. And he impressed his alkaline glaze pots with a key. And why? Because he and his brother were originally from Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. All right, so now we're moving to the Catawba Valley, which was a rich area. Again, we had German immigrants coming into here. And as I mentioned earlier, Daniel Siegel, the second site I chose to completely excavate, we knew that he learned redware, earthenware making from his father. And we don't have any of Adam's specifically marked pieces, but we have some of Daniel Siegel's. Now, he didn't slip decorate, like any of this. His only decoration were these coggle wheel kind of impressions. And then just his forms were amazing. So we know that he was making earthenware and then switched to making stoneware. So here's some more examples of his stoneware. And really, he's just Siegel pieces on any auction house will bring thousands and thousands of dollars. He was just an incredible potter, and he taught his son, James Franklin, and he taught his son-in-law, John Goodman, and Isaac Lefebvre was an itinerant potter. These pieces, I'm working on the kiln, that's what's behind here, and these pieces, these people are walking down to the site with these pieces in their arms, showing me these pots, and I said, let's put them right here and I'll photograph. So that was kind of fitting. And here is just moving as I went through the excavation. The footprint was very shallow. We know from the property landowner that it had been, the kiln had been pushed off down the hill in the 50s or 60s, but we still managed to catch the footprint of it. And what we find in the floor of the kiln, more pipe heads, because everybody was making tobacco pipes. But without, see, these are just the heads. You have to have a reed to smoke it. All right, here's just a final drawing of the footprint of the kiln, and it was 12 feet wide by 24 feet long, which is remarkably similar to Burling Craig's standing kiln. So the technology had not changed in such a. And oh, here's the final picture. And all of that white powdery stuff, this is wintertime. And so once I start exposing these thermally altered bricks from the kiln, they start sort of powdering up. And there's nothing that you could do about it. It was frost and other things, but sand in the floor, brick on the side, stone at the back. And he would have loaded from the back as well. And the firebox would be down on this end. So anyway, that was remarkable that it was the same. While I was doing that work, down the road was another early site of L.S. Ritchie, which we know a lot about Ritchie pottery, a multi-generational family of potters. And I went home for the weekend and came back and the site had been destroyed. So that's another reason why recording them, even though we're obviously not going to excavate all of them, recording them and maximizing information while we can is important. Give me some of that Oak Island. This is another student's project who documented 5 sites in the Blackburn region. Now he did site forms on the sites that he located by interviewing descendant family members of the Blackburn potters. And he did a nice production called Of Time and Place. That was his master's thesis. Okay, moving to Randolph County. One of the other potters, I've worked with 2 very wonderful groups of redware potters, today's redware potters, who do this replica work that we see here. And one of them is Hal and Eleanor Pugh in Randolph County, and the other one is David and Mary Farrell, who are at West. And they make their living doing some of these decorative redwares and reproduction wares. Hal and Eleanor also happen to be potters. So they are very tuned into the pottery sherds and the history of the site. So Hal had already sort of moved quite along on researching what's his family property there and who the apprentice was, potter apprentice who worked there. In addition to George Newby, who was one of the few African-American potters to apprentice there, who, when this site closed in 1830, he likely went with them to Indiana and left. So Hal had documented not only the sherds that I call them sherds, call them fragments or shards, but shards is blasphemy. Sherds is what I call them. So these are decoration. This is the decorative motif that he was finding on these pieces here with kiln furniture. That's a little write-up on now. So this is site number 31981. And he would take these fragments and then create a whole pot, recreate what the plate was based on those fragments. So then we worked together on using ground penetrating radar to find what was the kiln footprint. And this was a really eye opener for both of us because the ground penetrating radar will give you a signal of any soil that's been thermally altered. So on the feed out, it's like, static in these lines. Well, the footprint on the printout was circular. So we thought we were going to excavate, like Mount Shepherd, a small circular updraft kiln. And we were quite surprised to find our first corner. And then we found 2 corners, then we found 3 corners. We said, okay, this is a square updraft kiln. So there are reasons why the signal may have been round, but it was certainly a learning moment for Linda. And we know it's very early. We know they operated 1780 to 1830. We also found artifacts that date to that period. And again, we did this work with volunteers. Very shallow remains, but it was a very simple updraft kiln, like the one down the road here. This is the David Hockett kiln. Now, what Hal and Eleanor all further documented, and again, that's talked about in the 2010 volume of Ceramics in America, is that this was an English Quaker community, but they were cranking out these beautiful, elaborate kinds of slip decorated earthenware. But we know this is the best little remnant of these square updraft kilns that we found. All right, another site, again, we lost. We didn't get much of this one. People were grading for a pond and they hit a kiln remnant. This is the Moffat's Mill pottery. And all we got to do was 1 day of reconnaissance there, but we did find 1 whole pot. I thought that's pretty good. And that's all we had time for. The Moffats is where the McCoy and the Marable families also turned pottery. Another one that was reported by a local citizen to us was the Sioux pottery site. And again, sometimes this is all I get to do, is go record the site, map it, give it a site number to the site. This one in Cleveland County was another groundhog kiln that was disturbed from road construction. And we think this was the Robert Lookout site. And this article by Scott Smith shows some whole Robert Lookout pots that still survive in his collection. So it's putting all these pieces of the puzzle together. All right, in downtown Fayetteville, one of the very earliest salt clay stoneware kilns that was operated began in 1819 by Gurdon Robbins, who moved into Fayetteville, which was a market town, right, a colonial period market town. And he moved in there from Connecticut, bringing with him 3 Webster brothers, Chester, Edward, and Timothy. Timothy was the wagoner. Chester and Edward were the potters. And they cranked out the earliest stoneware that we have in the state. Here's an example of Edward Webster. Now, this site is very interesting because it had been reported on several times. There's an entire booklet on the styles of salt glazed stoneware. And this is one of those made in that area by the Webster brothers. So after just a couple of years, Edward moves off, he moves back to the north. Chester moves west and works in Moore County with B.Y. Craven and some others and continues to crank out some beautiful pots. But this site is in downtown. Here's an article, it was being graded away. And we had people out there all weekend, picking up pot fragments from the erosion area. But we think the footprint of the kiln may still be. Okay, so two sort of new discoveries, and I'm winding down, I promise. But stay with me just a minute. So these help us to further enhance the story of the redware traditions in North Carolina, traditions plural now. Because for so long, 100 years or so, the Moravian tradition, it was fully represented and it overshadowed all of these other backcountry potters. And yes, now we know more. Now we know how distinctive and unique they are. And we also have learned about, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story. We're still finding new kiln sites. So here is the Loy kiln site. which is reflective of what we call the St. Asaph's tradition of redware with geometric motifs, sugar jars. So sugar jars like that sell for $62,000 at the auction now, and they don't have to be signed. But because we have the kiln remains, we have the fragments from the site, we can lay it next to it and say, Solomon Lloyd made this. It helps us to identify that without a name on it. And that in auction houses means a lot. When you've got an affiliation, the same with the little flask. And then this last tradition I talked about, the Quaker tradition in Randolph County, you can see how even those motifs are distinctive to that Quaker. So new sites. And here's another one that we found recently by a farmer calling us in and showing us that he had found these materials. Now on Spoon's map, as you see here, we have, it's in the vicinity of Isley, who would have been the property owner at the time. And the property owner doesn't necessarily be the potter. I'll just say that. Those potters were working people. They didn't always own the land where they built their shops. So don't just eliminate that. But it was in this general area. You can see Graves, Johnson, Isley. The Spoon map is wonderful for this. Now, here's a whole sugar jar from a private collection. And then these are the types of sherds or decorated fragments that we found on this site. And again, this site had been altered. It had been pushed over. We did ground penetrating radar here. But we knew it was the St. Asaph's potter. We just don't know which Lloyd. We found some kiln furniture with the name Lloyd incised on it. Often things like the kiln furniture were used like doodle pads. You know, they might have been putting test numbers on it or dates or combinations or practicing their penmanship. So that's kind of fun when we find that. But there's the Lloyd piece. This was our ground penetrating radar, which, you know, again, we weren't able to do more with it than that. The site is still preserved. But take some of that Oak Island money for me to get back over there to do that. All right, finally, our last site today is this gentleman. Say gentleman, Jacob Weaver. So this is a site that we discovered again through the descendants of these people. Hal and Eleanor and I and Mary Farrell, we created an exhibit at the Pottery Center called Slip, Dipped, and Dotted, where we really wanted to put that message out there that there's a whole lot of other potters doing stuff out there besides the Moravians. And that caught the attention of some pretty impressive museum people and other ceramic scholars, which is how these two volumes came. And it went on a national tour, the Art and Play Show. But this lady walked in and she said, well, I've got some slip decorated pottery. Would you like to include it in your exhibit? We said, well, sure, we'd like to include it. And so this is what we knew before that. These are the redware potters in the Catawba Valley. Now, again, how many of these kiln sites have we found? There's two. Okay, so there's a lot more out there to discover, but we know that these people were out there making this redware. This is Jacob. These are, I think, the three pieces that Rosemary brought to us. So we're going, yowza, that's pretty cool. And the distinctive thing, I mean, these are obvious redwares. That's a peace cup. This is a plate. And what makes that plate kind of unique is the rim. You see the rim. It has a piece of slip at the rim, and then you incise through it. That's called sgraffito. And not many other potters do that. So you find a fragment of this, you're pretty sure it's a Jacob Weaver piece. So he did bowls. And when I say he, 2 generations again, but these are what she brought for us to put in the exhibit. On the underside of that bowl was just a simple letter J for Yolkop. They say Jacob, Jacob in German. All right, here we go. The Weaver family through 7 generations. And this is put together by the descendants who helped us sort of untangle this. So we have Johann Jacob Weaver the first. We know where they migrated from out of Germany, again through Pennsylvania, down the Wagon Road into Catawba Valley. John Jacob, number 2 is our primary potter, and his son, number 3, with his brother Ephraim. By this generation, by this 3rd generation, they're phasing out the earthenware and they're making stone, but they're still operating at the same place. So we went to the field with the descendants, and we found this log building. The shop ruins had burned. We found the place we thought would be the kiln remains. And Dr. Zug was with me at the time. This was a pretty wonderful day that we had. These photographs were shared by the family. This would have been the pottery shop. And we know it burned from a lightning fire in 1995. But you can see the shelf there on it has some plastics on it. I call this the red team, blue team kiln scrimmage. Because these are all family members who came out that long weekend. I did a 4-day dig there, and they came out, we got the mapping done, and we did what I call a phase 1 on exposing what was left of the kiln footprint. It was pretty hard work with a tree growing out of the middle. So we kept working on it. You see it's beginning to take definition. You know, we're getting side walls, we're getting back walls. You know, there's a point where we say it's either rubble with a cause or it's rubble without a cause. That's supposed to be a joke.